Well, it's Monday and we're welcoming Pat McArt once again. How are you, Pat?
Grand, Jude. It's, as you say, it's Monday afternoon, our weekly get-together.
Yeah, it was such a life is very hard for we people that are retired on a Monday. It really is tough, isn't it?
It's my favourite day of the week now.
They all blur.
Everybody else has got off to work.
They all blur into one sort of general state of happiness. Anyway, quite the opposite of happiness we're going to be talking about now, and that obviously is the death today of John Hume, the former leader of the SDLP, and famous dairyman. Now, you were the editor of the Dairy Journal during the 1980s, and you would have had considerable contact with John Hume, Pat. Do you want to tell us anything about that?
John bestrode the place. Like I always said, John he didn't need a boat in dairy. He walked in water. You know, he was a colossus. There's no other way or word. I can't think of a better word for John. Now, John he took many risks, and like it's all been rehashed and so on. But John, to me, John was the architect of the Good Friday Agreement. He produced the design, the blueprint, whatever expression you want to use. He came up with the whole idea of the three-stranded approach. And I remember at the start it was sort of dismissed, but then everybody realized that this was vital. There were three sets of relationships that had to be addressed, and it proved exactly what was needed. Sure, Jude, there were so many, what John actually came up with, all the civil servants started using the same language. It became known as Hume speak. Now, me and him got into a row one day because I refused. I think he went out to the UN and he delivered the speech. I called it the single transferable speech after Eamon McCann came up with it. But Eamon was dead right. He made the same speech everywhere. Let's spill our sweat, not our blood. The island of Ireland is united. The land of Ireland is united. The people are divided. It is the people who are divided. You can't eat a flag. And he said all the same things. And I said, John, I'm not publishing that again as the lead story. And he went bananas. But having said that, he said, like I explained it, he said, look, Pat, I was a school teacher, and what I learned years ago was repeat the lesson, repeat the lesson, repeat the lesson. That's how you get people to learn. So, well, he certainly repeated it, but he was consistent. And I heard Mark Durkin on this morning saying that John had a laser-like focus, and that's the best expression. He never, ever let up. He stuck with the same thing. He said, it didn't. No matter what changed, if the underlying analysis was right, you don't react to events. You stick with the focus on sorting the problem.
Well, I did a blog on him today because it struck me that there were two things that stuck out in the way he approached politics. One was an unswerving abhorrence of violence.
Yeah.
And the second thing was having full equal rights with every other citizen in the UK. Now, what interests me is he entered public life, 64, 65 maybe?
Yep.
At that time, in the north of Ireland, that was a very common attitude among middle-class Catholics.
Yeah.
They really weren't interested in a united Ireland. The IRA campaign, you remember, of 56, 62.
Petered out. Yeah.
And petered out because people in general, but particularly the middle class, just weren't interested in that stuff. They were aware of the benefits, some of the benefits of being part of the UK. And John said, my point was, he never was a nationalist.
No, he never was a nationalist.
He was a devoted believer in equal rights. And he also he was very, as you said, he was very courageous. Because the whole state depended in some ways, as I think time will show, the whole state depended on there not being equal civil rights. And if you start kicking that hornet's nest, it can lead to all sorts of terrible things, as it did actually.
Well, Jude, what's that word? Hegemonic, I think it's the word, the only basis for the Northern state was a majority rule, because if there was equal rights, that was it gone. So that's the only way it worked. But you're dead right. You said something there. Hume was not a nationalist. He told me on several occasions that nationalism was way down his list. Sure, he said himself, one of the things he said was, when he was a young fellow, 14 or something, or 15, Eddie McIntyre was holding a rally on the street, and he went along with his father. And he says, John said he was getting all excited, he says, about this nationalism and all the rest. And his father turned around and says, grow up, son, you can't eat a flag. Now, John, that's where that expression came from. He said he always remembered his father said, you can't eat a flag. So nationalism was not a big thing in John's life. But what it was, he did totally believe in equal rights and so on. But Jude, you know that when you think about it, one day I remember having a real big ding-dong of an argument with him and all that. But I realized halfway through the conversation, he had the brain the size of a planet. No matter what question I threw at him, he had a far better answer than I could think on the basis that he had thought about it. Like I said to him one day, where'd you come up with it? He says, well, look, Pat, he says, we have 800 years of conflict with the Brits. He says, the Irish don't trust the Brits. He says, the Brits don't listen to the Irish. And he says, so how do you break that long job? And he thought about it, and he thought the only way to bring it in is bring in somebody else. And he brought in the Americans. Now, he courted assiduously the Kennedys, Tip O'Neill, Daniel Moynihan, Governor O'Dwyer, and you name him. And remember they became, I think, the Four Horsemen, not of the apocalypse, but the Four Horsemen, and he brought them in. And they got Reagan. And apparently the apex, or whatever, one day, I think it was during the hunger strikes, and sometimes in the early 80s, Thatcher was meeting Reagan, and the first thing Reagan said to him, what can you do for my friend John Hume? And that put a lot of pressure on her. So that's the level of influence he got. And then, of course, he got the Nobel Prize.
Yeah. Although he did suffer the humiliation, as I noted in my blog, of having to share it with David Trimble, which was a terrible the only public humiliation it could be compared with would be the occasion whenever Bono lifted his arms along with David Trimble.
I always thought McCann, again, I have to quote Eamon McCann again. He says, I remember with Trimble, the man who won the lottery without buying a ticket. But
it's interesting, John Hume, it wasn't generosity, not so much a generosity, but a lack of interest in material things in a way. Like, I think he was very comfortable with, as you said, the Four Horsemen, the major Irish-American figures, and he enjoyed, I think, a drink, and he was very much at ease with men in places of influence. But I don't think he was a materialistic guy. For example, he got with the Nobel Prize a huge sum of money, which he promptly gave away to Vincent de Paul, half of it to Vincent de Paul, half of it to the Salvation Army. Yeah. David Trimble, who, in my opinion, I mean, it's comparable with Henry Kissinger getting the Peace Prize. David Trimble getting it. David Trimble didn't give it away. Didn't give away a red cent, as far as I know.
Well, Hume was brought up. His father was a casual docker, and he knew poverty and he knew hunger. And and he was careful with money, but he wasn't materialistic at all. Have you ever seen John? I used to look at his shoes, and half the time they'd be falling off, and there'd be no laces on them. And he was not big into the material things. And I remember Mark Durkin, who was then John's sort of cabinet chief, or chef de cabinet, as the French call it. Telling me that John sometimes even forgot to put on expenses to Westminster, and apparently on occasion lost them. In other words, just didn't get paid because that was not where he was at. Now, John was he without question, Judy, he had a brain the size of a planet. And without John Hume, and they can take it away, and there was things about John that people either liked or disliked, but without John Hume, there would be no peace process, there'd be no Good Friday Agreement, and we wouldn't be sitting on the island we are today without him.
How do you account for the fact that you had him? You had Gerry Adams on along with talking about him on Talkback today, I think. Yeah. And the Chris Buckler was at some pains actually to point out the contrast between John Hume, a man of peace, and Gerry Adams, man of violence, sort of thing. How do you account for the fact that John Hume really was totally opposed to nonviolence. As I said, I think it was one of the major driving factors in his whole career. And that Gerry Adams or Martin McGuinness saw violence as being absolutely necessary. How do you explain that?
You know, I had conversations, and I'm not name dropping, but I had conversations many times with Hume and McGuinness. There were two people brought up in Derry, but they saw the world from a totally different prism. McGuinness reached the conclusion that loyalism and unionism was never going to change, that the nationalist community was living in a state that was ruled by unionism, that it was majority rule, there was discrimination, there was bigotry, and you could talk all day, but nothing was going to change. That you needed violence, or you needed some physical force to force change. Hume, he took off from basically Martin Luther King and Gandhi and all the rest of it. Now, Jude, that's been across the world. There's a dichotomy there between people who want to or look at the world in a different way.
Why?
They were both totally sincere.
Yes, indeed. Why though? Was there anything in their backgrounds that would have pushed them one way or the other? Was there anything in Hume's background?
Jude, I come to this conclusion. Hume, no matter what his background, was very middle class. He went to St. Columb's. He went off to university. He went off for the priesthood. All his friends were the accountants, the doctors, and all the rest. Martin McGuinness grew up on the Bogside. His people were, working class, and the impact of poverty and neglect and discrimination and bigotry hit his people far more than they did. Hume's natural friends were the people who lived on the Culmore Road, despite living in the Bogside. He was middle class.
What do you mean by Culmore Road? Why do you, for some people that wouldn't mean anything?
That's like the equivalent of your Malone Road in Belfast. You know, the old saying about the SDLP was middle class, middle of the road, and middle aged, whatever. They're all middle.
Yeah.
There was a very, very good journalist in the Derry Journal when I was quite young, and she said to me one day, she says, "Pat, there's them and us." Now, she was from the Nationalist Catholic community. And I says, "What do you mean, them and us?" She says, "There are those who vote for the SDLP and live a nice, and all the rest." And she says, "Then there are those of us," she says, "where the houses are getting raided and wherever." And she says, "We see the world in a totally different way from them." Now, there'll be people in Derry going, "That's absolute rubbish," but that's the explanation that I was given. And by the way, I came to realize there was a lot of truth in that, because I met many people in Derry, and those where the troubles didn't affect them. But where was McGuinness's main vote? Places like Bogside, Gala, the big working class estates, where there were 70 and 80% unemployment.
Well, I heard Eamon McCann today on Talkback, and he was saying that John Hume grew up, he was a bit older than McCann, but he grew up very close to him. And essentially he was saying they both grew up in the Bogside. Now, Hume lived in Rosemount. Would I be right in suggesting that maybe Rosemount isn't the Bogside proper?
No, he lived in West End Park, and it's a nice big house.
Is that Rosemount?
I wouldn't call it Rosemount, but no, it wouldn't be Rosemount. Okay. It'd be more in the bog. It'd be heading around the Bogside area. It wouldn't be too far from the bog anyway. I don't know, like half of Derry became to be known as the Bogside. Now, you needed somebody with a better geographical knowledge of where exactly, but no, he lived in West End Park. I know where it is very well, but I can't explain it. But no, Jude, the bottom line is, I think Hume got slightly out of the background he came from, and Hume was very, as you said, he was very comfortable moving in those circles, the doctors, the lawyers, the accountants, and a lot of his advisors were people from that ilk, the school teachers and all the rest. And I think that was the way the working. One of the problems, or one of the claims, was made that the SDLP sort of eventually started leaving the working class people behind. It was like Tony Blair's Labour Party.
Yeah.
The work. That's it became that sort of way, and that whether that is fair or unfair is a matter for people to sit down and have a big long talk about it.
Well, maybe we just round it off with this, talking about John Hume. You were in a position to know him as a person, whereas most of us just knew him as, I met him a couple of times at the beginning of his life, even before he entered politics. And I was very struck by how good looking he was. He really was a good looking guy, and very energetic and very good humoured, which he didn't. That wasn't the image he projected later in life. And the last time that I saw him was when I was launching a book about St. Columns, Tales Out of School, and him and Mark McGuinness were the guests of honour. And Hume was beginning to suffer from dementia at that stage, but he still was able to give a very decent, cogent speech for about 10 minutes about how good St. Columns had been for him and his generation. And he was right, he put his finger in something there. The St. Columns led those guys into university, as you've said, or third level education, and moved them into the middle classes. And I suppose trained their brains in ways that they were able to take on this state-in, which was built on discrimination, gerrymander, which their fathers and grandfathers had accepted with a shrug of the shoulders and maybe a half joke at it,
Yeah.
But
but Jude, you started asking the question, right? There's Hume invited me to Strasbourg back about 1995, I think. That's a long time ago now. And I went out with him, and it was during the summer, so I took my wife and two of my kids. And John Hume couldn't have been, more generous or nicer. In fact, he took my youngest son, Paddy, onto the floor of the European Parliament, and you should have seen the security guards running after him. So my dear son always is that one that he was on the floor of the European Parliament. No, he did it for a laugh. But then the other side, John could be very prickly.
Really?
I mean, very prickly. He could be hard to deal with. And I saw that, and me and him had a couple of arguments. In fact, I'll keep it for another day for the book or something. But I had a couple of quite serious rows with him. And if John didn't get his own way, he was not a happy camper. I'll sum it up like this one day. He gave a speech out, I think it was the UN or somewhere, and he made the same speech again. And I told him, John, I am not putting that on as a lead story. It's absolute bollocks and whatever and so on. And he rang up and he was really irate. And I said, John, wait a minute. This is not the New York Times. This is the Derry Journal and all the rest. I said, just hold on a minute there, Pat. He says, this is the paper that gets me elected. And he had a point. But, you can put the...
Say it again, Pat. You froze for a second there. I've lost sound with you. Still can't hear you.
Oh,
that's better now. Yeah, you're back now, Pat.
something happened there, Jude.
Yeah.
Jude, I think that might be our tea.
Finish what you were saying there.
Me and him then we fell out more times than enough. But having said that, my respect for the man is colossal. He was a coloss, and he deserves every credit for everything he did.
Who would you compare him with, finally, then, in terms of Irish history? Are there any figures in Irish history that...
Without question, he is our Daniel O'Connell.
Really?
Without question. And I think it's only but right that he should be regarded as that.
Why do you make that comparison?
Well, he hated violence. He had the intellectual capacity to take on the British. He worked out a strategy that, okay, you can argue a whole lot of things about the IRA, but I don't think it was either the IRA were ever going to get the Brits on side or the Americans. Hume succeeded in that. He provided the roadmap out of an impasse. Martin McGuinness told me one time, he says, Pat, we can keep going for another 30 years. The Brits can keep going for 30 years. But neither of them had a way out of it. It was Hume came up with them. It was the catalyst for getting that out of it.
Mm-hmm. I heard Gerry Adams saying something to that effect, all right. Although he also added that at the time he was an MP, John, of course, was an MP, and Gerry Adams was an MP as well. So for them to talk together was the most obvious thing in the world. And yet there was a great opposition to it from the Catholic Church, from the British government, from the Irish government, from the Irish Independent, the Sunday Independent.
By the way, before we finish up, there's one thing I want to say on the record. I think the Sunday Independent owes John Hume one massive apology. Their coverage of Hume, and I am not putting any sort of soft soap on this, it was an absolute disgrace. It was disgusting. It was unbelievably nasty and vitriolic. And the people who were behind it should apologize. And I don't think history will treat them very kindly. What they wrote about Hume affected him very, very deeply. Very, very much so. It affected his mental health. Absolutely. It was vitriolic, Jude. As far as I remember, there was a cartoon on the back page with blood dripping from it. And the implication was Hume was responsible for talking to the IRA and Gerry Adams, that he was responsible for the blood of innocent people.
Amazing. And just final comment on that is that that notion of keeping Republicans at arm's length, don't talk to them, don't have anything to do with them, is alive and well and kicking in Dublin today.
Absolutely.
I mean, Oil and Fine Gael, on the same basis, really, are saying, no, can't touch these guys, despite the fact that the great majority of the TDs, Sinn Féin TDs, wouldn't have even been born during the Troubles, or if they were, they were infants.
But hold on, Jude. John Hume talked to Sinn Féin and was actually, Martin McGuinness and John Hume were actually quite good friends. And Hume, McGuinness, one day, a couple of the young Turks in the Republican movement were slagging off Hume. And I remember Martin turned around and said, boys, knock it off. He's doing the best he can. And, all the rest. Martin, and I met Martin years later, and he hadn't changed his mind. He had great respect for Hume. And Hume talked, and the Republicans are in government in the north with the Unionists. So I think this thing of holding their noses to the Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, they should grow up a little bit.
Yeah. But Daniel O'Connell would be the figure you would compare him with.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just take about 2 minutes maybe, and we'll have a look at this question of, like, John Hume, I'm convinced, is a good Christian and a Catholic. John Hume today is in heaven. But there's a special heaven reserved for failed Labour politicians and failed Unionist politicians, and it's called the House of Lords. And Nigel Dodds and Kate Hoey have ascended.
I was wondering where you're going.
The list of DUP Lords is unbelievable.
Yes, absolutely. I can't. Jude, I was listening to the list, and I couldn't believe. I think there's 3 Labour MPs nominated by the Conservative Party. These were the 3 who shafted, I don't think there's any other word you can use, Jeremy Corbyn every opportunity they could get. That the fact that the Conservative, the Boris Johnson's Tory party nominated them to the House of Lords tells me everything I want to know about those Labour MPs.
But it does seem to have a particularly soft spot in the heart of. They seem to have a soft spot in their heart for the soft seat that the Lords provides. I did a list of them there in a blog a while ago, and there must have been at least half a dozen former DUP politicians, with Nigel Dawes being the latest, who have, after their careers more or less collapsed, they moved into the House of Lords.
Yes, it's a bit like the Senate and the Republic, the House of Lords. It's a soft seat for failed politicians.
Tell us this: if you were offered a seat in the House of Lords, would you take it?
Of course I would. Jesus, Jude, 350 quid a day, sitting on expenses. I would have no hesitation, and I'd take anything that I could get. Jesus, Jude, it's the ultimate. What sinecure? It's a meaningless, pointless place to be.
But why not? It was paid £305 a day. If you're going to be bought, you might as well be bought at a decent price.
Things like that.
Okay. Thanks, Pat.
Bye, Jude.
Good luck, Freddie.